In the early 20th century, Europe was at peace, albeit an uneasy one. The major powers were finishing up their rapid colonization of Africa and East Asia. India had been subjugated, China humiliated, and every tiny island in the Pacific claimed. By 1914, there were only 2 independent nations in Africa. In short, Europe ruled the world. This era of expansion would end in June 1914. Europe would be thrust into one of the largest wars of this new century. Besides conquering the rest of the world, there was an arms race to create the most effective and deadly weapons. This included the Maxim machine gun, railguns, and the Dreadnought-class battleship, which at a minimum boasted a complement of 5 twin-turreted 10-inch guns. There were also several archaic empires beginning to crumble. The Russian Empire suffered a humiliating defeat to the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War. It would also face civil unrest at home during the 1905 Russian Revolution, which was targeted towards the ruling class. A Russian parliament was founded, yet it would be largely controlled by the Russian Emperor, Tsar Nicholas II. The Ottoman Empire didn't fare much better. Ever since the discovery of the New World, trade had slowed down in the Middle East. In 1882, Britain invaded and annexed the Ottoman tributary state of Egypt. They also lost Libya in the 1912 Italian-Turkish War. To make things even worse, they lost all their Balkan holdings that same year during the First Balkan War. The Ottoman Empire soon came to be known as the sick man of Europe. Tensions were also mounting between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. The recently annexed provinces of Bosnia and Herzegovina had a large group of ethnic Serbs. Because of this, Serbia believed that these 2 provinces should be Serbian and not Austrian. Serbia and the Black Hand, a secret Serbian military society, funded several Bosnian nationalist groups, such as Young Bosnia. When word came around that the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie, were to visit Sarajevo in late June, they formulated a plan to assassinate them. There were 2 attempts to kill the Archduke on June 28. Nedeljko Kabranović threw a grenade at the Archduke's car but missed, injuring 2 aides in another. After giving a speech at the city hall, the Archduke and his wife drove to the hospital to visit the 2 officers injured in the bombing. Yet on the way, the driver took a wrong turn. Then the engine stalled, which allowed another assassin, Gavrilo Princip, to approach the car and fatally shoot Franz Ferdinand and his wife. The Archduke's last words were, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Live for our children." By 12 o'clock, both of them were dead. The Austro-Hungarian government had wanted a war with Serbia for a long time. Yet it was the now dead Archduke that always held them back from declaring war. So, they sent a list of demands to Serbia and gave her 2 days to respond. When the 2 days were over, Serbia delivered its response. They surprisingly agreed to all the demands except one. They did not believe that Austro-Hungarian police should be allowed to operate inside Serbia. This played right into the Austrians' hands, and they quickly declared war. The Austro-Hungarian declaration of war didn't just spark a regional conflict in the Balkans. It caused a wildfire to spread across Europe. The Serbians were in a defensive alliance with Russia, so Russia declared war on the Austrians. But the German Empire was allied with Austria, so they declared war on Russia. France, which was in an alliance with Russia, then declared war on Germany. The British Empire, which had an alliance with both France and Russia, declared neutrality, as many in the Liberal Party didn't want to get involved. This would change on August 4, 1914, when Germany launched a surprise invasion into neutral Belgium. This was in accordance with the German Schlieffen Plan. Created by Alfred Graf von Schlieffen, this contingency plan called for German troops to outflank any French troops and forts by marching through the lowland countries. With the British now in the war, Germany had to act fast. Their first obstacle was the city of Liège, which was surrounded by a ring of modern fortresses. For the next week and a half, the Germans besieged Liège. They even brought up heavy siege guns to punch through the thick concrete walls of the forts. The Belgians put up a stiff resistance, but by August 16th, the last fort surrendered and the Belgian army retreated. While the battle did end in a German victory, the Belgians were able to hold them off long enough for Allied French and British troops to deploy and aid them. The Belgian army continued to flee west before the German steamroller. The capital of Brussels fell on the 21st. Antwerp only held out for 12 days. At Mons, the small British army held a strategic bridge across the canal. Yet, French troops on their flanks retreated, forcing them to withdraw. The German army continued to advance. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Russian army was soundly defeated by the Germans at Tannenberg. They mistakenly broadcasted their marching orders over an unencrypted radio message. This allowed the Germans to intercept the message and use the limited number of troops at their disposal to outflank the Russians and annihilate them. The Russian army was almost completely destroyed, with almost 80,000 killed and 92,000 captured. The Russians also lost 350 heavy guns. Russia was knocked out of the war until 1915. In the Balkans, the Austrians attempted their first invasion of Serbia. The first battle on Serb soil broke out at Ser Mountain in mid-August. The Austro-Hungarians had a few outposts on and around the mountain. Small skirmishes broke out and more troops entered the area, until the two armies were fighting over the surrounding towns and villages. 4 days after the fighting started, the Austrian morale collapsed, and they retreated across the Drina River. In the panic, many soldiers would drown. The Allied retreat from Mons was far from a disorganized one. The British, French, and Belgian armies withdrew in an orderly fashion, engaging the Germans as they went. This series of fighting retreats would later be known as the Battle of the Frontiers. As German forces began to get closer to Paris, the Entente powers soon became desperate. Luckily, a French scout plane saw that the German First Army, under Alexander von Kluck, had exposed their flanks in an attempt to encircle Paris. The Allies took advantage of this and attacked on September 6 at the Marne River. Troops were even brought in from Paris by taxicab. The desperate attack, conducted by the British and French forces, saved the French capital, and the German army was driven back by almost 50 miles. German forces stopped the withdrawal at the Aisne River and opted to fortify their positions by digging a line of trenches. The Allies did the same, and soon the two armies were attempting to outflank the other. This soon came to be known as the Race to the Sea. The Race to the Sea would end with the Battle of Ypres. Fighting began on August 19th. At first, communication between command and the actual soldiers on the ground was minimal at best, so it was really up to the individual unit to command themselves. The Allies weren't able to do much other than hold the line and hope that their flanks were doing well. Their lines would soon form into a half circle or salient. The Belgian forces holding the north, exhausted and low on ammo, broke and retreated. Luckily, King Albert was able to open the floodgates of the canals and waterways in the area, making a body of water more than a mile wide in some places, securing their flank. German units were now attacking all across the line. By this time, Allied lines of communication had been secured, so coordination was much easier. The Germans did break through the line at Geluveld in the south, yet the 2nd Battalion Worcestershire Regiment was able to drive them back and avoid disaster. This is where Adolf Hitler also saw his first action. He miraculously survived the Massacre of the Innocents, which saw 40,000 German youths, mostly former university students, killed in just this particular engagement. The Germans tried to break through Allied lines one more time in early November. Evening units of the Prussian Guard which was the personal bodyguard of the German Emperor Kaiser Wilhelm, took part in this attack. Despite the presence of this elite unit, the attack made little to no success, and by November 22nd, the battle ended. Both armies settled in for the winter, and fighting died down. The War of Maneuvers had ended, and a war of attrition ensued. Yet 1914 would end on a happier note. Around and during Christmas Day, the two sides would come out of their trenches and trade gifts and bury their dead in the Christmas truce. Despite this, the war continued, and 1915 would soon arrive.